Good morning. This is R.J. Regan with Trucker Church coming at you with week 7, if you can believe it. I am down here in Almirada, Florida, which is in between Key Largo and Key West, not quite halfway. But it's December 22nd, 2024. The year is coming up to an end very quickly, Christmas next week. And before we get into this week's message, which is going to be Joshua 1, let's review the verses that we have gone over the past previous 6 weeks. So if you recall, back in week 1, we went through 2 Chronicles 15:7, and that memory verse was, "But you be strong, and do not lose courage, for there is reward for your work." That was 2 Chronicles 15:7. Then in week 2, we went into 2 Corinthians 5, and that verse was 2 Corinthians 5:17. And 2 Corinthians 5:17 was, "Therefore, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things passed away. Behold, new things have come." That was 2 Corinthians 5:17. Then in week 3, we did Galatians 2, and that memory verse was Galatians 2:20. And that goes, "I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and delivered himself up for me." That was Galatians 2:20. A week after that, we did John 14, and the memory verse was John 14:21. And that was, "But he who has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I will disclose myself to him." That was John 14:21. And then the next week after that was Romans 12, and the verse there was Romans 12:1. And it said, "Therefore I urge you, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, which is your spiritual service of worship." That was Romans 12:1. And then the next verse was 2 Timothy 3. And the verse where there, I actually threw 2 verses at you. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 says, "All scripture is inspired by God and profitable for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work." That was 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And then this week, Joshua 1. And the Bible verse is Joshua 1:8. "But this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all that is written in it. Then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success." That's Joshua 1:8. Now, I've talked each week about the importance of renewing your mind, transforming your mind, and the self-talk, and the words that we say to ourselves are so important. And I came across this old article. I was going through the X feed, getting an update on news articles. And there's this old article by Daniel Goleman. Now, Daniel Goleman, he's a psychologist and a PhD from Harvard University, a real smart dude. He actually wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, among other books, I think back in 1995. But in 2011, he wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review that said, it was called "Resilience for the Rest of Us." But he says the 2 ways to create resilience is talking to yourself and retraining your brain. Now, it's interesting to me that the verses that we've been going through, and specifically you can go to Romans 12, talking about be transformed by the renewing of your mind. These are Bible verses. These are thousands of years old. And yet it takes a Harvard business professor in 2011, 2,000 years later, to say, "Hey, guess what? We came up with this great idea. If you talk to yourself, and you retrain your brain, that's what's going to create resilience." Now, resilience is obviously strength, diligence, perseverance, all of these positive qualities. If you're going to be strong and courageous, he concluded that's what you need to do. You look at the words that you say to yourself, talking to yourself, and train your brain. And it's just, to me, it's just kind of interesting how all of these super smart psychologists and PhDs are like, aha, we came up with this great new idea. And to me, it's like what it said in 2 Timothy 3:16. "All scriptures is profitable for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be adequate for every good work." It's in there. It's already in the scripture. So just read it and apply it. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting article. Harvard Business Review, Daniel Goleman, back from 2011. So with that, let's get into it. Joshua 1. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you understand the format and process with Trucker Church. I read through the chapter first without interruption, and then stop, and then I go back through and I give my my study notes, basically, or commentary, if you will, what I came up with was important, or how the Scripture spoke to me in the message. So, without further ado, let's get into here. Joshua 1, and this is, let's see, here we go. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads I have given to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea, toward the setting of the sun will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, and be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all that is written in it, for then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, Pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, saying, Prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are to cross this Jordan, to go in and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you, to possess it. And to the Reubenites, and to the Gadites, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, Remember the word which Moses the servant of the Lord commanded you, saying, The Lord your God gives you rest, and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your cattle shall remain in the land which Moses gave you beyond the Jordan, but you shall cross before your brothers in battle array, and all your valiant warriors, and shall help them until the Lord gives your brothers rest, as he gives you, and they also possess the land which your Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to your own land, and possess that which Moses the servant of the Lord gave you beyond the Jordan, toward the sunrise. And they answered Joshua, saying, All that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words in all that you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. All right, that's Joshua 1, and that's my read-through, and let me just give you my notes. All right, as usual, we like to start off and figure out, okay, who was the author of this book? What was the purpose of the book? When was it written? And who was he writing it to? And so I did a little research and found that it makes sense, but the title of the book, Joshua, is also the author. And it's either Joshua or one of his scribes. And Joshua 24:26 says that Joshua wrote at least part of the book. But in addition, some material was likely added after Joshua's death by the high priests Eleazar or Phinehas. And this includes the account of Joshua's death, the conditions of his death, placement of the 12 stones in the Jordan River, etc. So Joshua was most likely the author of a majority of the book, or at least one of his close scribes. Joshua was probably about 93 years old when Moses died, and it took 7 years for the Israelites to subdue the land and another 10 years to divide up the land and settle the people in the land. So this is about it's about a 17-year span, this book of Joshua. And it was written about 863 years ago, so approximately 1400 BC, this book Joshua was written. And the purpose of the book was to document the Israelites' conquest of the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua after Moses' death. So let's get into it here. Verse 1, it says, "Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore," remember that word therefore is very key. It means something. Everything that was there, written before, now we're making a conclusion, a summation. It says, "Now, therefore, arise, cross this Jordan, you and all the people, to the land which I am giving them to the sons of Israel." So, a little history. The first 5 books of the Bible, called the Torah, were written by Moses, and those are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The next book in the Bible is the book of Joshua. Now here's a question. Why this word therefore? Now that Moses is dead, now they cross the Jordan. Why did they have to wait for the death of Moses? That's a good question. See, Moses' whole life was about leading the Israelites out of slavery, out of Egypt, to get to the Promised Land. Why do we have to wait for Moses' death? Why didn't Moses just take him into the Promised Land? Well, in the Old Testament book of Numbers, chapter 13, tells us the story. So Moses does a great job. He confronts Pharaoh. He leads the people out of Egypt. They cross the Red Sea in a miraculous parting of the Red Sea, and they get right on the edge of the Jordan River, getting ready to cross into the Promised Land. And Moses stops right there, and he says, you know what, before we go in, let's send 12 spies into the land. So that's exactly what he did. He sends out 12 spies into the land of Canaan to see what they're about to get involved in. Well, the 12 spies come back, and 10 of the spies come back, and they're like, you know what, this land is a beautiful land. It's flowing full of milk and honey. It's a gorgeous land. I mean, God couldn't have picked a better piece of real estate. This is fantastic. However, there's some giants living in this land, and we're going to be like grasshoppers if we go in there. We're going to get crushed, okay? So the 10 of the 12 spies came back and gave a glowing report of the land, but there's no way they were going to be able to conquer it because the people were so big. 2 of the spies came back, and they again gave the same recount, beautiful land, flowing with milk and honey, and he said, yes, there are giants in the land, and these giants are big. But you know what, people? Our God is bigger. God says, go take in the land. Let's go take the land. Now, in one of the classic mistakes of leadership, Moses listens to the majority report. He listens to the 10 spies that said, these are giants and we won't be able to overtake the land. And in essence, he doesn't trust God anymore, which is just fascinating to me because, he's witnessed all sorts of these amazing miracles and what he did to Pharaoh. And here he is. Remember, this is his whole life goal, was to get to the Promised Land in Canaan. And Moses, in a moment of stupidity, listens to the majority report of the 10 spies. And so he doesn't go in the land. And God says to Moses, well, here's the deal, Moses. Because you didn't listen to me and go conquer the land like I told you to, you are never going to go into this Promised Land. And on top of that, every single Israelite that's 20 years old and older, you're not going to go into this Promised Land either. Now, all of a sudden, Moses had his realization. He's like, oh my gosh, what did I do? He said, you know what, God, I'm sorry. I'm going to change my mind. Let's go in. We'll go take the land. And Moses is like, no, you're not going to take the land now. You've already proven yourself that you don't trust me. You are never, ever going into this Promised Land. And he begs and he pleads, God, please, please, please. And finally, God says, listen, don't bring this up to me again. You are not going into the Promised Land. Neither are anyone that's over 20 years old and older. You are not going in. So 40 years they're wandering around this desert land. Finally, Moses dies. Everyone that's over 20 years of age and older dies. And so at that point, God comes down and says, all right, Joshua, now Moses is dead. It's time for you to lead us into the Promised Land. Now, why Joshua? See, one of the 2 spies, it was Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, those were the 2 spies that gave a good report compared to the 10 that gave the bad report. So that's why Joshua was that person that was allowed to bring the people into the promised land. And again, he's 93 years old when he does this. So, verse 3. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. Now, remember here, it says, in verse 2, it says, I am giving you the land. I'm giving it to you. He's given this land to the Israelites. But remember, they must do something. They must go into the land, do battle, and subdue it. God has a role to play, and so do we. Don't confuse the two. Don't try to do God's job, and don't think that God will do something that you could be doing or should be doing on your own. Never confuse the two. You have a role to play, and so does God. God gave them the land, but they had to go in and subdue it. Verse 4, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun, will be your territory. Verse 5, no man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Now, this is interesting to me. He says, I will not fail you or forsake you. I will be with you. But understand this. Although God promised never to fail or forsake Moses or Joshua, but God did not allow Moses to enter the promised land because he disobeyed a specific command from God. Moses lived his whole life with the desire of entering the promised land, and in a moment of anger and frustration, he disobeyed God, which prevented him from entering. And remember, like I said, Moses pleaded with God to reconsider. And God was angry with him and said, nope, you didn't listen to me, you're not going in. But the point is this. Just like a parent who loves his child, that does not mean the child will get everything he wants. The same way God was with Moses. But he did not get into the promised land. Just because God says no to your request or prayer, that is not an indication that he does not love you or that he has forsaken you. See, even Christ on the cross prayed to have the burden removed from him. He didn't want to get crucified on a cross. And in Luke 22:42 it says, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. And even Jesus asked in the end, he cried out in Matthew 27:46 in a loud voice, he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? You're asking yourself, what's the point of this, RJ? The point is this. You are not God. Do not make eternal decisions based on temporal circumstances. This theme is repeated not only with Moses and Jesus, but also with Joseph and Job too. Be aware and do not be surprised at a fiery ordeal that is among you. 1 Peter says this, Beloved, do not be surprised at this fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. The point is this. God is God. You're not God. We are here in temporal circumstances. We're on enemy territory, and this is not our final destination. So don't get confused when certain things happen that you're not anticipating or thinking should happen, the same way Moses, same way Job, same way Jesus, same way Joseph was. Okay, we need to make sure we maintain that eternal perspective and not let temporal circumstances cloud our judgment to make those foolish decisions. Go down here to verse 6. It says, be strong and courageous. Remember, this is a theme from the very first week of Trucker Church. The goal here, the idea is that we as men, mature men of God, need to be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. It's repeated time after time after time. And once again, it's repeated here again. Going back to a little bit about this resilience, the Daniel Goleman article about talking to yourself and training your brain. Back in 2000, no, it wasn't 2000, it was probably 1992, 91, 92, is when I first started memorizing some verses. And I remember the very, very, very first verse I memorized was Isaiah 40:31. And Isaiah 41 said this, But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint. And then I followed it up with another verse, Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Isaiah 41:10. Those are the very first two verses that I had memorized. So whenever I was having difficulty, and it could be something, significant, maybe a business problem. I was an entrepreneur, had a manufacturing business, or something simple like running a marathon or a running race. I would repeat these verses to myself. But those who hope on the Lord will renew their strength. So as I'm running, wanting to quit, wanting to stop, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength, will renew their strength, will renew their strength. It was that self-talk that kept me going, that helped me with my resilience and diligence to keep going. And again, like Daniel Goleman says in his article, How to Be Resilient, talk to yourself. Be careful of the words that you say to yourself. And in here, Joshua is repeating it time and time again. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. For you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Verse 7. Once again it says here, only be strong and courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you, and do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. Notice the common theme here again. Why do we do what God tells us to do? So that you will have success wherever you go. Self-interest and profit motive. You'll see this on virtually every page of Scripture. You want success? Do what God says. And this idea is presented twice here in Joshua, in verse 7 and in verse 8. Verse 8, it says here, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Just as a reminder, that is our memory verse for the week. Verse 9, have I not commanded you? Again, be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This is the third time Joshua has repeated this, be strong and courageous. And remember, things that are repeated are worth emphasizing. They are important to the author. Verse 10, then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are able to cross this Jordan, to go in and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess it. Verse 12, and to the Reubenites, and to the Gadites, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God gives you rest and will give you this land. Now, let's go back here. Why did he specifically call out the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh? It's important to look up. So did some study on this. As Joshua specifically calls out this group and reminds them of their promise to Moses back from Numbers 32. See, this group of people, they owned lots of livestock, and they did not want to cross the Jordan to go into the Promised Land because the land where they currently were was exceptional for raising livestock. Now, when they asked this request of Moses, Moses got ticked off. He was angry with them for making that request because he thought it would discourage the other Israelites from crossing the Jordan and going to war to take the land God had given them. But the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh promised Moses that they would in fact cross the Jordan and fight once the war, and then once the war was ended, then they would return back to their wives and their little ones and settle the land on this current side of the Jordan, which they were. And Moses said, okay, if you're willing to come across and fight and then go back to the land, that's fine. We'll hold you to that when the time comes. So that was agreeable to Moses, and so this is where Joshua is bringing it up and saying, hey, just as a reminder, remember the word which Moses commanded you. You're going to fight when it's time to fight, and guess what? Now it's time to fight. So, verse 14, your wives, your little ones, and your cattle will remain in the land where you are now, But you shall cross before your brothers in battle array, all your valiant warriors, and shall help them until the Lord gives your brothers rest, and he gives you, and they also possess the land which the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to your own land, and possess that which Moses the servant of the Lord gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. All right, so they answered and said to Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Verse 17, just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words in all that you command him shall surely be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. So when it says here, if you do not obey the words that you command the people, it says you're going to be put to death. And what this shows is the seriousness and commitment to the commands and the words of God. Why so serious? See, these survivors witnessed the presence of God, not only when they left Pharaoh and his slaves in Egypt, but while they were wandering in the desert, waiting to cross into the promised land. They witnessed all types of experience and evidence of the wrath of God. Specifically, there were 3 leaders under Moses. Now, this is when they're waiting on the other side of the Jordan. They're already out of Egypt, and they're no longer slaves. They're wandering around in the desert, and there's 3 dudes that said, hey, Moses, you know what? You think you're all that in a bag of chips. You're the supposed leader of all these people, Israelites, and the 3 guys were Dathan, Korah, and Abiram. And you can read the story for yourself in number 16. But they basically said, hey, you know what? We've got the Spirit of God too. You think you're all that. It's like we can lead also. We don't really need to follow you. Well, God told Moses, said, you know what? Why don't you step back, Moses? I'm going to show them how I feel about this. And this is, God opened up the earth, and they and everything that they owned was swallowed up and destroyed. Okay? 250 people, wives, little ones, cattle, everything they owned, everything that pertained to them was swallowed up in the earth. Well, you would have thought the Israelites would have learned a lesson, said, okay, Moses, you're the man. We just heard and saw what God is capable of with his wrath. But the next day, there were other Israelites that they grumbled against Moses and said, Moses, you dirty dog, you just killed 250, Israelites. I mean, I can't believe you did that. This is ridiculous. So God said, I tell you what, let me show you how I feel about this, people. So then God sends a plague upon them, and another 14,700 people died. So those now remaining with Joshua, they saw firsthand what God was capable of doing to those who disobeyed his words and who went against his appointed leaders like Moses, Aaron, and now Joshua. So they were serious about the words of God because they saw how serious God was about his own words. So all that to wrap this up here, Joshua 1, the reminder, the last word here is be strong and courageous. And think clearly, think biblically, have an eternal perspective. And let's do our 2-minute recap of Joshua 1. All right, the 2-minute drill, the 2-minute summary of Joshua 1. Joshua 1 marks the beginning of Joshua's leadership after Moses' death. And I broke the chapter down this way. The first 9 verses is section 1, and that's basically God's commission to Joshua. God speaks to Joshua directly, affirming Moses' death and appointing Joshua as the new leader to guide the Israelites into the promised land. He promises Joshua every place he sets foot will belong to Israel, outlining the boundaries of the territory. He assures Joshua of his constant presence, promising protection and success. And Joshua is commanded to be strong, courageous, and obedient to the law, meditating on it day and night. The second section is verses 10 through 15. That's basically Joshua's commands to the people. So Joshua instructs the officers to prepare the people to cross the Jordan and then take possession of the land. And he reminds the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh of their previous oath and commitment to follow the Israelites and to conquer the land. And then after they've conquered the land, to go back the other side of the Jordan where they can raise their livestock. And then the last section, section 3, verses 16 through 18, is the people's response. The Israelites affirm their loyalty to Joshua, pledging to obey him as they did Moses. They pray for God's presence with Joshua and declare that anyone rebelling against his authority will be killed. They encourage Joshua to remain strong and courageous. The key themes here in this chapter were that passage emphasizes leadership, obedience to God's word, faith, unity, and the fulfillment of God's promises. So that's the 2-minute summary, the 2-minute drill of Joshua 1:8. This is R.J. Regan. It's December 22nd, coming at you from Almirada, Florida, 2024. Have a Merry Christmas, everybody, and we'll come back to you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.